Now let's turn to my wonderful panel. Today, Ashish, Dipayan, and Anirban will help us understand from their perspective the imperatives of data analytics COEs. Specifically, why such COEs are required, how to build and scale a data analytics COE, best practices for building, scaling, and operating such a COE and deliver value-creating insights for the business, the maturity curve for a COE, operational day-to-day versus strategic planning and growth as two ends of the spectrum, and the trend towards self-serve analytics and the role of COEs in enabling that. I'd like to invite my panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Ashish, let's start with you.
Yes, and again, hello to everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here at this event organized by Prescience. So thank you again, Suranjan and Anirban and Shiva for having me. So very quickly about myself, I'm currently with eBay. I am managing the global center out of Bangalore for eBay, where we do a broad range of analytics as well as other data operations for the company across the world. Before I came to eBay, and that was 10 years ago, I would say, because I've been with eBay for 10 years, I've had a long career focused more on marketing analytics, marketing insights, and marketing planning. I've worked in some larger global organizations like Microsoft or SAP Miller as an in-house analytics as well as a data expert, so to speak. But then I've also worked in some ad agencies to support the agencies in terms of developing data-driven campaigns for their clients and so on. So yeah, some experience as a consultant, some as an in-house so-called client. It's been an interesting journey to sort of see this whole space evolve from what used to be called, maybe MIS or statistics to now being called big data and AI ML, right? So yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. Dipayan?
Thank you, Suranjan. As with Ashish, thanks for inviting me for this forum. So what myself, I'm a partner in the data science practice for the Boston Consulting Group right now. And prior to this, I have about 20 years of experience, most of it in analytics. It's been across various companies in retail and e-commerce. I've had my own startup, which I ran, co-founded and ran with my partners for about 5 years in the space of marketing and retail analytics. So I have primarily been focusing on, like Ashish, on marketing and retail analytics with a little bit of focus on financial services, risk and collections as well. And yeah, glad to be here and look forward to engaging discussion.
Amazing. Thank you, Dipayan. Anirban?
Hello, everyone. This is Anirban. I'm one of the co-founders of Prescience Decision Solutions. We're really delighted to have Ashish and Dipayan in this webinar where we talk about the data analytics COEs. Thank you so much. So as a brief background, so I co-founded this company about 5.5 years back, which is primarily focused on data analytics and data science space, working with multiple different companies in different levels of data science maturity and providing them solutions that actually have business impact. Prior to this, I have been mostly with the IT companies in India like Infosys, TCS, and Mindtree, which has now become LTI Mindtree. And so my analytics journey actually started at Mindtree with a video surveillance solution for security and all. And from there, it has now moved to more on the enterprise data side. So thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Ashish, Dipayan, and Anirban for that. Now let's get on with our discussion. As we settle into the new normal, the post-COVID era, so to speak, data which pervades our environments and businesses has to be harnessed to deliver the insights needed to understand and engage with our markets, customers, employees, and other stakeholders. We know that data is available at scales, volumes, and velocities we've never seen before. As has been said by many pundits, data is the new oil, right? and businesses are trying to get an edge using that new oil, so to speak, right? Enterprises go about it in different ways. Our belief is that COEs are the most effective and organized way to do that. A little bit of definition for everyone here of a COE. A COE is a team of experts who use data and analytics tools to provide information to business stakeholders, to help reduce risk, uncover new revenue opportunities, and more. Successful COEs are multidisciplinary, using a variety of technologies. Everything from data engineering, data science, including AI, ML, IoT analytics, and related technologies that process and make sense of the data are part of the COE's tools. As a team, they act like a service bureau to the rest of the organization. They're curious and eager to solve business problems. And the best COEs are always tied to well-defined business outcomes. That's truly a powerful combination. With that as a background, and with Ashish, Dipayan, and Anirban's expertise in this space, I'm sure we are going to have a very insightful, invigorating discussion here. I'd like to open that with Ashish. eBay obviously is at the forefront, got millions of customers, suppliers, lots of data. Making sense of that is kind of at the core of, I would think, eBay's core proposition and differentiation to some extent. So Ashish, tell us about eBay's story of deriving value from data. Why was the IAC, the India Analytics Center, set up? How it has evolved over the last few years? And how have partners enabled your journey?
Sure. Yeah, so I think let me start with, in general, how organizations, whether it's eBay or other large organizations, particularly global ones, have been thinking of COEs, right? And there's a wide range of ways different companies think. And my observation, and before I go specifically to how we thought through it at eBay, is for many companies, when the word COE comes up, they are thinking primarily talent. That, okay, COE equals talent. So let me find a place where I can get good talent for my organization. But I mean, I think my experience is that you can hire the best talent in the right location, but if you're not going to align it to the kind of business problems you need to solve, and then you enable them in the right way to solve, it's not going to be a COE, right? So purely a talent play is not something that typically works. Other can be, again, a location, purely a location, primarily a location focus, that look, my business is spread in these parts of the world, and maybe I need a location which is kind of equidistant from these different markets or something like that, right? And from my experience, that is not also probably the perfect one. I'll explain, why these things came into our discussions as well. Mm-hmm. The third thing I think that people think of is cost. And often, when you're thinking of a COE, then you probably don't want to kind of maximize for the cost outcome, because then there is going to be some trade-off. So the E in the COE is, if that is the real priority, which it should be, then maybe you should not be completely driven by the cost factor. So I think these are some of the kind of heuristics people use to kind of decide why they want a COE or where they want it, etc. I think at eBay, let me explain to you, the nature of our business and how sort of we sort of started doing this thing. So, and sometimes COEs happen a bit accidentally also. So let me kind of give you a bit of that context also. So eBay was actually not at all thinking in terms of let's say India as a place to really grow their capability in analytics back in 2009 and so on. This is before I joined, so I know a little bit of the history even before I joined and set up the COE. There was an employee, in the headquarters of Indian origin, wanted to move to India and then work from India, and sort of, that person and the management thought, hey, okay, you're a good employee, you like working at the company, why don't you sort of start working from India? And then slowly a few contract employees were hired. Then a year later, it was made into a more of a full-time employee setup, and so on, right? And then by the time I joined, we had a small group that was, people like just out of college, typically. The person who had originally joined had left. And so the small group was kind of operating almost like a fresh out of college startup, where each person was working with an individual person in the US headquarters, and almost like running a help desk.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was talking to eBay, I think the idea that sort of came out of that discussion and so on is that, look, we can see that there is talent in India. We can see that the talent can understand our business problems and probably can help solve them, but we don't know how to take full advantage of this at scale. So the way I embarked upon the journey was, I kind of observed in the first few months, like, okay, how does this company operate? What's the culture and so on? A few things kind of popped out for me, right? So one is that, and as I think Dipayan would also know very well, e-commerce, business is a very interconnected business. So you have multiple departments that you need to run for the train to be running. Each department can be incredibly complex in itself. Like, just creating the website and maintaining the features on the e-commerce website itself is a huge department and a very intense area. Shipping, logistics can be its own area. Marketing can be its own area. Managing the revenue side, the financial side can be its own area. Risk, trust can be its own area. But at the same time, they do need to talk to each other. And a lot of times you do something in one area, it affects other areas. And what I noticed and other colleagues noticed is that at eBay, what we had done until that point was that we had analysts in the company, mostly in the headquarters, but they were all sitting in different departments, in different buildings, and they were not really talking to each other. So so a lot of times, like, senior executives would ask more open-ended questions, which required a multidisciplinary, cross-functional solution. And the company was struggling to get answers to that, even though the data was there and all that. So one of the first things that I identified as a value proposition for a COE for eBay was that, okay, what if we create a cross-functional team in one location where they can be sitting on the same floor, they can all go through a common onboarding so that they all understand a bit about each other's areas, and then they can reach out to each other literally at an arm's length, and help solve the problem. So that was the first idea that we worked on, so that we could create small, mini COEs within the COE, right? So like a small shipping team, a trust team, a financial analytics team, a product analytics team, and so on. And I would say 70% of the time they would spend within their domain, but then that 30% when they would talk to each other and solve problems together was golden from the point of view of the headquarters, thinking, okay, there is some value here, compared to the status quo, which was having people only in one location in the US, let's say. So that was one. The second area in e-commerce that I think makes e-commerce a little bit more unique compared to many other domains is it's a very fast-moving business. It's very competitive and fast-moving. So things are happening on the site every day, and it's a marketplace. So there's stuff happening with the buyers, there's stuff happening with the sellers on a daily basis, and so on. And you have to literally plan your business week over week, right? Every week, like Mondays, Tuesdays are very busy in these companies because a lot of data comes in over the weekend on what happened previous week, and they have to create new coupons, activate new coupons, maybe offer a deal, maybe change some feature on the site, turn on something, shut down something. So what I noticed is that, look, in this kind of a somewhat crazy world, the fact that the India COE would be half a world away from the headquarters might be a blessing in disguise, in the sense that we actually would be able to touch the data earlier than anybody else in the company, because the servers are obviously running and they're getting the data ready, let's say over the weekend. And so our Monday morning, we would have seen the data that the rest of the company may see 24 hours or 36 hours later. And so that helped us also create a value proposition that we would take on a lot of the critical reporting and the kind of the telling, like, the nuggets of what happened last week, even starting to build like some, not very scientific, but a quick forecast for what to expect next week. And so we created a daily feed for senior decision makers for different regions and so on. And that became an immediate value proposition because the key thing about the COE is that it should be able to do something that cannot be done elsewhere in the company. And so suddenly now everybody was enabled with, when they would walk in on their Monday mornings, they would have all these insights that would help them run their business more smoothly. So that's the second one that sort of was a key value proposition for us. The third one I would say was a bit of a talent play in the sense that in India, for a company like eBay, it was easier to recruit, a good combination or a good mix of people, either from the business side or from a more technical side, or a combination of the two, right? Because in India, we do have a large number of professionals who may have an MBA plus a more technical degree like engineering or sciences and so on.
So you get a lot more techno business kind of skills.
Yeah. And I think in other parts of the world, those kind of mixed talent combinations were not as much. You typically find more of a pure statistician or a pure computer science person, but not someone who's a combination of the two, right? So I think that was very useful for our value proposition because, again, it's a complex business. You need to understand the numbers, but also the business context behind the numbers. To be able to talk to decision makers, you need to be able to speak in their language. And so we were able to ramp up and hire a lot of these. We did hire pure technical people also, but we were able to hire enough of the mixed kind of a talent base that could quickly then start driving productive conversations and help scale the influence part of the COE.
Sure.
Right. That's the third one. I think the cost factor was there, but it was not a necessary condition, but it was something that sort of added an extra competitive edge to our value proposition because it is a Silicon Valley-based company. In the Silicon Valley, it was very tough and somewhat expensive to hire talent quickly and to retain talent over a long period of time. And I think although that differential seems to be diminishing every day, but it was something that sort of just added that extra benefit for the company or gave the company more options by having a COE in a location like India, right? So these are some of the things that we thought of carefully as we built a COE. I think the next part of your question was the journey, how it was, right?
Yes.
So, sorry, 1 second. I think I got some. Okay. So I think that journey, I think, has been a very sort of a bit of a, not a roller coaster, but it's kind of been a journey where the COE grew and grew for the first 4 or 5 years. And then the company went through some major restructuring. The company started taking a different approach to, okay, how many people do we need to, do different kinds of work? And to what extent can we productize? Can we, create tools to do the same kind of work, right? So we went through that transformation about halfway through our journey. And then the focus shifted from just kind of growing teams in terms of pure size to building teams that understand the domain end to end so that they can build various kinds of tools that business owners can use. And I know like later on in the discussion, we'll be talking a little bit about that. But I would say that it was initially more about kind of creating a more conventional pyramid of talent, like hiring enough people who are individual contributors, then people who can be team leads, and then people who can actually manage larger portfolios. And I think we also focused a lot on university hiring in the first 5 years, and that really paid off for us because we brought in a lot of people, from both undergraduate and graduate programs who, coming in at an early stage of their career, they were able to quickly understand our business, and they were able to then make an impact very fast, and then they got longer-term careers. So I think we focused there as well. I think the one area where we, I feel did a good job was that we did not try to grow across different regions very quickly at the same time. we really focused on growing our North America business, impact first. Then we started ramping up in Europe because we found out that Europe is very different from North America in terms of how they like to work with a remote team, how they make decisions, how they like to use data. And even within Europe, you'll see difference between the UK and Germany. So I think we had to do a lot of learning from North America before we can go and then work with Europe. And then working with Asia Pacific, I think was also very different because our business, the company's business in Asia Pacific was much smaller in size. And idea there was that we didn't want to sort of, again, keep reinventing wheels from scratch. We were trying to take solutions that have already been developed in more mature markets, analytical solutions, and then asking them to reuse those so that it was more efficient in that sense. So
Right.
I think it was a journey in that sense over the years. We did that. And then I think the part of the journey which I think was did have a big impact for us was the right kind of talent that we were able to get. Not only the talent that we were able to grow within the center, but then we were able to create pathways for that talent to go and work for eBay in different parts of the world. And what that did is that created an ambassadorship for the center, because people who had kind of sort of graduated from our center and then were able to make an impact in other locations, they were able to then convince people, stakeholders that, hey, if you kind of came from this location and you got that kind of training and exposure, that must be a place where I think I can also benefit by partnering.
Right.
And so right.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think I'll stop there, and I think we can.
So this was great, Ashish. We'll come back to some of the points that you talked about. Sure. Very interesting journey at eBay, that it kind of started as a accident, experiment, adjustment, whatever you call it, and then it built out over time into a full-fledged strategic center of excellence, right? So Dipayan, based on your experience and what you're seeing in the marketplace, what are some of the models that you see? Do you see a similar trend that companies do an experiment and then build out a strategic place, or do they start strategically thinking about a COE and build, or do you see a combination?
Yeah. In fact, when Ashish mentioned the experiment, I think this is the first time I was hearing about it, because usually, it's a big investment. It's a big decision, not just in terms of cost, but obviously even in the onshore facilities, there's a lot of investment that folks have to take out of their regular day jobs to ensure that this unit is a success. So there's a lot of transition that happens. There's a lot of travel that happens from, let's say, the North American market here to familiarize. There are IT departments and probably, strategy departments which get involved. So usually it's a fairly well thought out process, right? So in terms of the models, so there are multiple vectors on which I've seen models operate. The first vector is ownership. So one of the ownership vector types is like eBay has with Ashish mentioned, like I used to work for HSBC, is completely owned by the entity itself, right? Then you have a lot of BOT coming up as well, where especially for institutions that necessarily do not have an India presence to begin with, right? So to send somebody just to set up a center in India, they don't know the landscape, anything. So there are organizations in India that are helping you set it up, accelerating the setup, accelerating the hiring, putting the processes together, because they've worked before as well in setting up these COEs, and then transferring it, operating it for a couple of years, proving the value, setting the hiring, training, ways of working, the onshore client parts, everything in place, and then transferring it over it. There are instances where the centers are completely outsourced, to begin with not. And I have done a couple of them long back with, again, most of these will typically, I'll concentrate mostly on the US, because like 90% of the COE setting up in India has happened in the US from the US companies, and these will typically be companies from the, let's say, smaller companies in the Midwest or the South, etc., that are not as global. That struggling. So somebody, either a big provider or a very specialized analytics provider, somebody like Prescience, goes out and says that I'll set this up for you. And it's not in a BOT model because they're not even have the vision at that point in time that I'm going to have an India office, etc. They were very happy to have somebody else do the heavy lifting. And then there are hybrids. So there are folks who want to do, but they know that hiring takes time, so they're going to do like a hybrid. So that's when the ownership vector is one vector. The other vector, very interestingly, is where to home the entire COE, right? In terms of which department does the COE take care of, fall under. So typically, a lot of people are putting the analytics COE in the COO's office. And see, the central idea is that initially, especially in banks, folks used to have risk, marketing, collections, the analytics teams being federated across and kind of working with those departments themselves, right? And eventually the problem became that while there is a function in analytics that you aid the business in decision making, there is also a quote unquote an audit function, right? Where you have to kind of point out whether the department itself is meeting the benchmarks or not. And having it report into that department severely impairs the ability of the analytics department to do that sort of quote unquote audit function. So then organizations basically figure out that if you put it reporting into a central function, and what will be that central function? So typically it's either the COO or the CFO's org these days. In some cases, it is the CTO's org as well, but mostly I've seen them home it either in the COO's org or the CTO's org. Couple of organizations are having the chief data analytics officer directly become a CXO and report into the CEO, but those are few and far between. Right? And then ultimately, what to put in the analytics COE, and that broadly has two functions. Data engineering and data science plus analytics, or only data analytics. So typically data engineering in some cases reports into the data function, and in some cases it kind of reports into the central, the CTO's function or whatever. So that is also a call that you take on whether to end to end give the entire data responsibility to one team and have it out as a COE, or do we keep the engineering part out and keep it under the CTO's org and just have the pure data science and the analysis work on the. So those are basically three main vectors, a combination of which is all the COEs.
Right. Sure. Great. I think that's a great segue into what I'm going to do next, which is run a quick poll where we'll gauge a sense from the audience on what they think a better data analytics business model is, a COE, a hybrid, or a decentralized model. So let me run that poll. And everybody in the audience, please, it's coming up now. So there are three options. Which data analytics business model is better to deliver consistent and sustained business insights is the question. Yeah, and there are three options. Decentralized, which is the analytics team members are within business and functional units, not in a centralized facility. The second option is COEs. Third option is hybrid. So you have certain functions in COEs, certain functions inside the functional units. So I'm going to keep the poll open for another 30 seconds or so. Okay, great. So far, I'm seeing the hybrid option as kind of overwhelmingly winning the poll. About 67, that is 2/3 of the participants or the responses think that a hybrid is a better option than either of the two other options. So, which kind of makes sense. I think there are, and that kind of is a segue to my next question to you, Dipayan, or discussion point, is that obviously there are certain functions and areas which are best kept closer to the functional leader or the functional unit or the business unit. And there are some which need the scale and capability to be in a central COE, so to speak, right? What have you seen? Is that something that you think is how organizations also look at it in your experience?
Um, See, there are two parts to it, right? One, technically, what should be the case, and one is what actually happens in orgs, right? So what
Right.
actually happens in orgs is sometimes people want to keep the information close to themselves, etc., etc. So we'll leave that aside for the time being.
Yeah.
But typically, I think responding to the question as to what should get done is, so there are, so firstly, which orgs typically embrace analytics first, right? So the orgs that uh, kind of fulfill two functions. One is they have a lot of data which they are unable to process fast enough, right? Number one. And number two, the team members in the org itself are not necessarily that analytically sophisticated that they can do it, do as part of the analysis themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So classical example is marketing, where you really do not want to take serious decisions upon marketing expenditure without a very solid logical and empirical evidence-based decision-making process, number one. And most of the people who are in the marketing team essentially are coming at it from a domain expertise, right? They're not
Right.
engineers. Whereas if you take like the engineering team from the other ends, most engineers potentially are almost 80% there in terms of data science, right? They have a quantitative background, so they can potentially run a very simple or even a complicated analysis themselves. So those teams that have that kind of data hunger and need to operate with data, without data, it's going to be very suboptimal decision making and do not necessarily have the capability within themselves. Those guys will typically first reach out to you, right? The second is existing. If you have, so typically the way that organizations evolve, that you have a startup in a, when the organization is starting up, it typically does not have a separate data function, right? Because mostly you're just focusing on land grab at that moment, just growth.
Right.
But individual departments have data needs, even if they are very simple, like reporting needs, etc. So typically the functional head will just get a SQL server, get one analyst on the side, and that guy will be kind of doing his own analytics, right? And when the organization becomes big enough, suddenly you see that there are like these 4 or 5 different analytics teams sitting across the organization. Typically, it works well if you identified those guys and said that, see, some sort of a rudimentary data model already exists, some sort of a pull for the requirement for the data already exists. Now let us pull a few of these resources together just so that they can enjoy economies of scale in terms of the data platform, in terms of, the managerial bandwidth, etc., and kind of work at it that way. Right. The other part to responding to your poll as well, to the hybrid model. In fact, whenever we worked at, let's say, prior companies like Flipkart, etc., what we used to say about the hybrid model is that there are two ways in which you engage with your analytics COE. One is using the COE purely as muscle power, where I know everything that needs to get done, right? So I come out to you and say, okay, give me sales in the first quarter for by category, compare it to same quarter previous year by the same category, wherever the growth is more than the market growth, market has high growth, etc. So that's an analysis which is very explicit. The reason you are reaching out to the analytics team is you don't know SQL, or you don't know Python, or you don't know have access to the data platform, right? So in that case, it's best for that sort of very quick and dirty ad hoc information and descriptive kind of work. It typically makes sense for the analyst to work directly with the department, because if the analytics COE houses those analysts, the analytics manager typically then just becomes a postman who's taking a requirement from the department and just pushing it out to an analyst. But where you're engaging brain power, right? So for example, I have this problem over here in inventory optimization. My working capital requirement is very high, but I'm also getting stocked out. So give me a solution to this problem. Or for example, much more basic problem of I have a app and I'm not really collecting the user data on the app. I need to just, that is a problem which cannot be solved by just pure muscle power, right? You need to understand the domain, you need to understand the technology, etc. That is typically what the analytics team should, focus on. So that's the way you kind of separate out the best, give the analytics COE the highest chance of success in the longer term, because both the user and the analytics team are seeing that as kind of a win-win.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. Ashish, I'll come back to the journey that eBay. I'm sure you've experienced a little bit of what Dipayan also talked about. How have you used partners, third parties to enable your journey, both from a talent, capability, technology perspective? Ashish, you're on mute. 1 second, let me unmute.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so I think when it comes to partners, we definitely have worked with different types of partners, is what I would say. So one would be a partner who is really a talent partner for us, because they have a great deal of experience in understanding what kind of talent a company like eBay would need to build out its analytics organization. And what they do is that they help us identify people with those talents, and then they work on a contract basis with us, with the idea that the contracts can keep getting renewed every year as per the business requirements. And then they also become partners on the learning and development of that talent, right? So they make sure that the people keep growing with the business and with the COE, right? So that's what the partner firm does. So Prescience is an example of that. And then what we do from our side is to make sure that that the talent from the partner that's coming into our organization is getting as much exposure, as much opportunity to help solve the business the same way that a full-time employee would get, right? So we then sort of make it a win-win for both us, the partner firm, as well as for that analyst. So that's one type of partner. The other type of partnership that we have explored in the past is very boutique firms that have specialization in solving certain kinds of problems. So let's say you take in the space of marketing, there is a whole methodology where some firms specialize, which is like marketing mix modeling, right? So and these are typically firms which have a very small number of employees. These are people like maybe myself who have worked in companies for many years, grown to sort of really get good at a certain methodology or certain type of problems, and then they work with us on a fixed term project basis to then augment the capabilities of the existing people in the COE, and then solve the problem. The benefit there is that we don't, because a lot of times these projects we get from our business decision makers have fast turnaround times, and a methodology, let's say this marketing mix modeling thing I talked about, it typically requires a few years of practice and learning to become good at it. So somebody in my COE would not be able to ramp up and deliver a quality product on their own. But if they partner with a specialist in that methodology, the person inside eBay is then offering the domain knowledge of the business, whereas the person coming in from the partner side is offering the technical or methodology expertise, and then together they can solve the problem, and so on. So that's the second format that typically has worked for us. The third one I think that we have tried is basically individuals, who are very senior individuals. So they're not really coming into our organization, sort of as part of the bigger group of employees, but they come and stay with us for a few months, or several months to, again, solve some strategic issue that we have, whether it is to develop a new training program or to develop a better way to, evaluate talent and so on and so forth, right? So that's the third example I would say that we have used of partners. But it is an evolving space, right? Because the one type of partner that I did not describe, but the company eBay uses, but not in my COE, is we are constantly looking for data visualization companies who can provide us shrink-wrapped solutions, who can give us licensed solutions that we can use for either data visualization or improving the ability of our teams to write code in a much more easy way. Because we are often hiring people who are not hardcore coders, but they're good problem solvers. So can we give them an interface that can make coding easy for them, right? So there are a lot of vendors who specialize in that. So I think definitely a spectrum of partners that we have to work with, because COE should know what they're really good at, just like a company in general, and focus on that and try to get help on other areas.
So basically focus on your strengths and leverage best of breed partners for everything else.
Right.
Makes sense. Anirban, as we've talked about, organizations look towards using data, using COEs, using capabilities for competitive differentiation and increasingly monetization, right? How has Prescience helped with data science requirements as well as COEs specifically?
Yeah, thanks, Suranjan. So I think some of these points have already been covered, but I will give our experience in this thing. So we do work with different customers for the COE in data analytics. And while it might seem slightly counterintuitive, because generally when you talk of a center of excellence, you think it's part of a small part of the business. But generally, the data science COE is about the enterprise, as Dipayan mentioned. So we generally take a business backward approach to understand the business requirements and convert them to data science problems, build the solutions, and deliver it back. And the engagement takes on different levels based on the maturity of the organization, which is something Dipayan covered earlier. So there are companies where they've just started on the data analytics journey, and while they might have been existing for quite some time, but they are not really digital bond kind of thing like say eBay is. And so there you have to get engaged in a slightly different way, then help them in terms of formulating the data policy, the data governance things and tools and technologies, and do the whole thing like setting up the data warehouse, creating the reports, and then move to the data science part of it once the data warehouse and the reports are available. And this is something we have done with a few customers, like customer in m-commerce customer in Kenya, and large e-commerce customer in India. So creating the whole data warehouse, the building the reports, and then targeting it to the data warehouse. And then once the data is clean, and actually the data quality also becomes a big issue when you work with companies who have just got into this data analytics journey. So that is one way of working. On the other side extreme is like companies who are like already quite matured in the data analytics journey, and already have specialists working in different areas. So in such cases, we actually work scaling up the teams with the specialists. Sometimes we take up creation of POCs, so proof of concepts, so which they might want to do, and to see if this thing will work or not, and they don't want to spend the bandwidth of one of their own folks, so they may ask us to do that, or some ad hoc, short-time work. So that's the way we work it. And many of our customers actually fall in between this continuum. And depending on how mature they are and what are their objectives, so which is very important, we engage with them in that model.
Sure. And if I go back to Ashish's thoughts around using partners and classifying partners into talent partners, and expertise partners, so to speak, whether it's individuals or whether it's a company, where would you say that Prescience plays?
So we play both in the talent side as well as the expertise side, depending on which part of the uh, data engineering or data analytics you are looking at. So it could be that in certain cases, like for example, if you're working with companies like eBay, then the domain knowledge would be very high, and then we come in with more of a technology knowledge and all. But there are other places where we actually come in as experts and do the whole work. And then also even in larger companies, for example, with one large customer, we created a POC on creating NLP based looking at the customer remarks on their chatbot on social media, etc. So again, that is something they wanted a POC to see if it's something worth doing. So that's where we come in with our expertise and get that thing done, and then the company can take a decision whether it's worth pursuing that or it's something to be just left behind.
Okay, great. I'll just move on to another area that I wanted to touch upon, and I think we've touched upon it in some of the discussions so far. As per Gartner research, the 2022 data analytics trend, which is very significant, is a skills and literacy shortfall. Through 2025, Gartner estimates that majority of CDOs will fail to foster the necessary data, and virtual workplaces and competition for talent will heighten this challenge. Now, the virtual workplace environment is facing a little bit of backlash over the last few months, as we've seen, but all trends point towards that it'll be a more virtual workplace than it was 3 years ago. So that trend is only going to increase, right? Now, here's the question to you, and wanted to have a discussion around this. So Ashish, maybe we'll start your response. From a talent attraction perspective, is a COE a better option than having analytics capabilities spread across the business?
Well, so I don't know if it's a binary answer to that, because I think the way I am sort of, based on my experience having worked not just at eBay but before eBay, is that when your data maturity or even your sort of data literacy in the business is still in the emerging side, you do need a COE that can kind of accelerate that process. I think for individual business units or silos to do it, all concurrently will be very difficult, because each of them might do it differently. Some may do it better and others may lag behind. A COE can help all boats rise in that early phase. I think once the data maturity and the literacy and the use of data, etc., in insights. When I say data, I also mean insights. So it's not just pure data. Once that is improved, I think then you need to start dividing and conquering between what kind of things should sit in the businesses and what kind of things can sit in a global COE. So going back to some of the points that Dipayan made earlier, that some departments are much more sensitive or particular about the data or the insight sitting very close to them. So typically at eBay also, I see the departments which end up touching an external customer on a very regular basis using data, want that data to be closer to them so that they can completely trust and verify what they're sending to the customer, right? I mean, anything to do with policy, risk, trust, even like, if you're trying to bring in advertising clients on your ad platform, I can see that sort of need to keep it closer. So I think those kind of businesses should be allowed to then grow their own capability, because you don't want to unnecessarily create distraction in the functioning of the COE. Then the other kind of area where the COE should still be there is teams, which often have a lot of run the business type requirements. But at the same time, they have a lot of bigger, more complex strategic questions to answer. And what I typically see in an organization is that when you have both needs equally strongly, you will skew towards the RTB. Like whatever resources you have, you'll deploy for solving the fire drill of today. And then those bigger questions keep remaining unanswered for months or even years, and you don't sort of go to the next level as an organization in terms of your IQ about the business. So there the COE can play the role of taking on those bigger, more complex questions, which they can kind of go into a lab kind of thing and keep working on, while there may be an in-house team that is solving RTB questions, problems on a day-to-day basis with the business. So I think you need to grow in that direction. I think that ultimate gold standard is that if all analytics becomes app-based, and the apps are so wonderful that everybody can use them, then obviously you don't need COEs. Everybody in the organization has
analytics nirvana state, right?
Yeah. So you kind of reach that point, right? But nobody's there, I think, right now.
Right. Dipayan, what do you think from a talent attraction perspective? Obviously, what Gartner is talking about is relevant, right? And it's very topical. What do you think? Is a COE a better magnet for getting talent versus the other option?
Yeah, so I actually think yes. Both getting and retaining a COE works better when you compare it to federated, right? And there are a couple of reasons. One is when you look at me as an analyst, I have more career options in a COE as compared to in a federated. And I've seen that when we are at Flipkart. So analyst comes in product and tech supporting analytics, and then 2 years later can go into category analytics, and then 2 years later can go into marketplace, and then 2 years later can go into logistics and so on and so forth. And the reason it happens is because the management is the same by and large, right? At one level, it's the same. Though there will be different managers, different teams, and they are incentivized to grow people for retention. There are some teams which become strong, some teams become weak, so you want to cross pollinate, etc., etc. So the senior management is working to ensure that people move across teams. That results in better cross pollination. Also, it enables vertical growth if you want. So for example, if I only want to do supply chain analytics and I go in supply chain in an e-commerce company, I can keep doing analyst, senior analyst, manager, senior manager, etc. At least till a director, senior director level, you have room. So if you want to grow horizontally or you want to grow vertically within analytics, you can both do that, right? Typically in a federated structure, if I am working with, let's say, the collections team, and the collections team is different from the risk team, and I want to go into marketing analytics or risk analytics, etc. Those at the VP level are different orgs, so you need to go through an IJP process, and it's an entirely different management team, so you're not very sure. So all those organizational dynamics come into play. So COE is better, I believe, from an analyst point of view to grow their career. That's number one. The second is functional leadership. So typically when I am in a federated structure and I'm an analyst, I'm not reporting into another analyst, right? I'm reporting into a product manager, an ops manager, a business manager, etc. So that person is going to look at me as a resource. This guy will come and get me my MIS, get me my data, get me some few analysis, etc. They are not able to solve a technical problem I run into, right? So if my Python code hits a roadblock, I'm not able to, my logistic regression model is not giving me the necessary lifts, etc. I cannot go up to them and have a scientific discussion. Okay, let's try interaction effects, or let's try splitting this continuous variable into multiple categorical variables and dummies and checking. Right. Not able to have that. That technical leadership is missed. Some organizations have tried to overcome that by doing a data science council, right? Where there are the senior data scientists who will come in a council and their mentor but it kind of, I think, is a little bit of a utopian concept, because typically people have to take time out of their day jobs to kind of almost do it on a charity basis, right? Number one. And the senior guy does not have a skin in the game. It's not their project. So they come there and they might give a little bit of a theoretical, feedback there rather than actually go deep into the problem and solve it. So by and large, these two issues, and then just from an organization perspective as well, best practice sharing, especially around tools and techniques. If I've cracked a macro to do some sort of a recursive loop, right, that can be used across different. If I have some Excel templates, that can be used across different teams. the data platform works better because the same, let's say, Redshift table, right, can be then used by multiple teams rather than individual teams making their own little Redshift data marts on top of that.
Right.
So for all of these reasons, operational and talent, I think from a talent retention and attraction, it's better to have a specialist team, right? I mean, it's the same as IT, let's say, for instance. Now you could have engineering report into the function as well, right? You could have MarTech report into marketing, and you could have like financial tech report into finance. But you choose to have engineering as a common function because, for many. So I think it works that way for analytics and data science.
And Anirban, I think Dipayan, thanks for that. Makes a lot of sense. I think if analytics as a career, if somebody is pursuing, then a COE is a better home for that individual, is what I hear. Anirban, you are obviously in the thick of it all, right? Analytics is your business, so you only hire and try to retain all the analysts, but you're competing for talent with the eBays and Flipkarts and others of the world, right? How do you manage to attract and retain?
Yes, so that is something basically what Dipayan covered. You will have the ability to work. Today you're working with the e-com space. Maybe a year or 2 years down the line, you can work on the pharma side or financial services. So that is one big factor. In fact, to support what Dipayan was saying, we have had some people joining us from the large GCCs, of US companies. I mean, not the high-tech ones, but on the other side, because they were put in a team where the manager just says, okay, build this report, build that, and that guy doesn't see any career path, right? And he, as Dipayan said, he doesn't know where to go and solve his problems if he's facing some tech problem. And he says that 3 years down the line, I'll still be doing the same thing. I have no clue why I'm here. So they come out because they think, at least from a knowledge perspective, skills perspective, they should keep growing, right? So that's what we have been seeing. So for companies which have a solid COE and they work across different functions and technologies and all, there it becomes easier for them to put people into different roles and all, and that's a big attraction for them.
Got it. Great. Thank you. I think we are almost at the end of the hour. I'll just run a quick poll to get a sense from the audience. This is basically to get your reaction. Did we meet your objectives for the webinar? The poll is coming up. The answers are yes or no. Very simple. So just let us know how we did by responding to this poll. And while this is going on, I wanted to thank Ashish and Dipayan and Anirban for your time. It's been a very wonderful session, at least for me. It's validated some of my own thoughts, but also I learned a few things around the kind of partners that COEs should leverage, the kind of vectors, so to speak, that companies should assess, evaluate as they're looking at options on what to do, and what the companies like eBay have done or used to select what their choices were. So it's been great to me, and I hope to everybody in the audience as well. Thank you, Ashish, Dipayan, Anirban, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. Give us your comments. We'd love to hear from you.